Okay, good morning, folks. Welcome to House Human Services. This morning, we are back at S36, an act relating to Medicaid payment model for residential substance use disorder and treatment services. However, that's not really what we're talking about. What we are talking about is Section 4 of the bill, which deals with the public inebriate program and how the health department, the mental health department, Department of Corrections, and community providers and law enforcement, how these things all interact, because that section of the bill is asking for a repeal of what language is currently in statute that has been extended several times for a year or 2 years or whatever. And so we're trying to make a decision about whether we're biting the bullet. That's not a good thing to say. Whether we're going to make a distinct decision here or whether we're going to, kick the can down the road or not. Essentially, that's the decision that we're trying to make here. And so we have invited a number of folks here to get the perspective of what is happening both in the community and what are we doing in terms of trying to build infrastructure for this kind of struggling program around the state. We've heard testimony of several programs that have closed in the last few years, and really understanding that it is something that is difficult to maintain on its own. And so thinking about a new way of doing things. So we'll hear more about that. But first, we're going to hear from Peter Hull, the Chief of Police in Colchester. And Mr. Hull, thank you so much for being here this morning. We appreciate the fact you were able to Zoom in for us. I want you to know your representative went looking for you in the building because he wanted to welcome you to the State House. Thank you for being here. So the first thing we're going to do, because it looks like we have most of our witnesses here, we will just go around the room. We'll do the in-person, people who are here in the room first, and then we will move to the Zoom, since we have people who have not been in House Human Services yet this year. So my name is Teresa Wood. I'm from Waterbury, and I also serve Bolton, Buellscore, and Huntington.
And Donahue, I'm from Northfield, and I also serve Berlin. Welcome.
Good morning, I'm Dan Noyes. I represent Woolkit, Hyde Park, Johnson, and Belvedere.
Brenda Steady, East Milton, Westford.
Good morning, Chief. Doug Bishop, Colchester.
Good morning, Todd Nielsen. I represent Brandon, Forestdale.
Good morning. My name is Don Eastis. I live in Guilford, and I also represent Vernon.
Hello, I'm Esme Cole of Hartford.
Julie McGill from Bridport, and I also represent Middlebury, New Haven, and Leadbridge.
Hi, I'm Marie Garofano. I live in Essex, and I also represent Essex Junction.
I'm Charlotte Strasser. I'm in the Ticket Systems of the Duke.
We go right around the room.
I'm Claire Neal.
Morning, I'm Tom Huffing, I'm the legislative coordinator for the Vermont State Employees.
Nicole Sazio, Director of Policy for the Department of Mental Health.
Katie Winslet, Office of Legislative Counsel.
Corey Haas, Commissioner, Department of Mental Health.
Al Colmier, Chief of Operations, Department of Corrections.
Carla Molander, Advocate Back Chamber Post.
Jessica Chicano, Policy Director, Department of Health.
Okay, now we'll move to the screen, starting with Representative McGuire.
Hi, good morning, Representative Eric McGuire, Rutland City.
Tony?
Good morning, Tony Fallon, Department of Health, Division of Substance Use Services.
Thank you. Kelly?
Good morning, everyone. Kelly Doherty, Deputy Commissioner at the Department of Health.
And Chief? We can't hear you. You're muted.
You're looking for.
How about now?
Yep, that's good.
Okay, Chief Peter Hull, Colchester Police Department. My apologies. I woke up this morning with whatever is starting to go around my department, and I didn't think that you folks would appreciate it if I shared that in person with you.
We do appreciate that you thought of us. Thank you, and I hope you feel better. So the floor is yours, Chief, to hear about your experiences and any feedback that you might have about S36 before us.
Well, so as I said before, my name's Peter Hull. I'm the Chief of Police of the town of Colchester. I've been a police officer in Vermont since 1988. And I am a current member of the Vermont Association of Chiefs of Police. And my position on this topic is a shared one with my colleagues. I'm speaking to you today in support of repealing Section 4, I believe it is, in that the opposition to sunsetting the responsibility of the Department of Corrections to take individuals who are incapacitated and in protective custody. Protective custody is used as a last resort to care for people who are unable to be safe due to intoxication. Using an alternative site like the ER, which is where many of these folks are screened initially for that purpose, we feel is very inappropriate. It lacks security. Furthermore, in a time when we are have increased concern for our healthcare workers' safety, it would expose them to further dangers, which would include assault. And it can also result in disruptions to the care of others in that setting. Police departments in Vermont also do not have the capacity to be utilized for this function. We're not built to hold people for long periods of time, and we do not have the facility or the staffing to accomplish that. I mean, if someone should be in protective custody is left alone and not taken into protective custody, even though they may need to be, they're in danger of moving towards criminality, where they would victimize others by their decisions and actions, or their behavior would cause unsafe circumstances where they endanger their own safety as well as others. This is a statewide issue, and really, we see the correctional center housing these folks for that period of time in which they are no longer incapacitated is really the only alternative that we have.
Thank you, Chief. Appreciate that. And when you said that this is an issue shared by your colleagues in other police departments, is that something that you folks have had an opportunity to talk about in terms of, since this bill has passed the Senate?
Yes, we've had multiple discussions in meetings. I know that Chief Burke testified last week in a different committee on the governor's judicial bill. I think it's part of that.
Yes.
On the same topic. So.
Okay. Thank you. Can you describe a little bit? We had folks from the healthcare here yesterday. We had a physician and then a nurse representing emergency room nurses, and just am wondering what. So when you are called, so whether it's a citizen on the street calls police, or a local establishment calls, and there is an individual who is causing a disturbance of some sort due to their intoxication or other substance use. Can you describe what you typically do? Given we know that the Howard Center in Chittenden County no longer has a public inebriate program.
So currently, if we're called to something and we determine a person is incapacitated due to intoxication, we try to find a safe space for that person. If there's a responsible adult who's willing to take care of that person, or a place where they can be watched and cared for until they're able to do that for themselves or make reasonable decisions. If that is not available to us and we have to take them into protective custody, we would then transport them up to Fletcher Allen or UVM Healthcare. I'm showing my age here. they are screened in the ER to just, and that's to be determined if it's truly this is an issue of substance, or if this is an issue, a medical issue that may be causing some of the problems, or if there's a medical need for them to stay there and be observed for a period of time. If it is an issue of inebriation, the hospital fills out the appropriate paperwork, and we then transport that individual up to the correctional center in St. Albans currently. It's a very time-consuming process, especially for a variety of reasons. To take somebody into protective custody is not our first choice. And we do work to try to find people who would be willing to take these folks on. A lot of times in the college setting, and we have a college in our community, there are people who are responsible adults who will take on that responsibility. But there are times when that isn't available, or the person is presenting in such a manner that even though somebody may be willing to try to take care of them, they're not able to control the behavior of that person, and these folks are making decisions that, they're not really have a capacity to control their behavior at that time. Everybody reacts differently to substances, as we all know, and there are some folks who do very poorly when they're in that state.
Okay, thank you. We have Representative Donahue and then Representative Steady.
Good morning. Thank you. This is all focused on public inebriation. And I'm wondering how that chain of events that you just described for how something would be handled contrasts with somebody who's incapacitated by a substance other than alcohol, because we don't have protective custody. We've never had a parallel statute for protective custody for any of these phases. So how does that play out?
Well, it's very difficult because we do not have that tool in the toolbox for other substances. And currently, if we find someone who is so affected by a substance that they are unable to function, we would call rescue and encourage that person to go to the hospital. But that threshold's really high, unfortunately. Unless we are seeing something that's very life-threatening, if they're say they're using a heroin or something like that, we try to hook them up with someone who can watch them, but that's really about the end of our ability to deal with those folks.
So there's no parallel of any type in terms of how you can address, in terms of being incapacitated, what would be the same situation? There's no alignment for any piece.
And the thing is, there's a lot of dual use, and it's very hard if someone is, let's say they're using another substance as well as alcohol. The alcohol gives us the avenue anyway to at least try to take them into protective custody and get them accepted.
Thank you.
Representative Steady.
You ever have an instance when they might have their children with them?
Oh, that's happened.
Yeah, I've heard it has. And how do you handle that with the child?
Well, it's a complication, and we look hard for a relative or responsible adult, who can take the child temporarily. Usually that's with permission of the person who's legally responsible. If that happens, if that's the person who's getting taken into protective custody, most of the time they're pretty cooperative in providing you with some information to facilitate the care for their child. Worst case scenario, we would have to contact DCF and go through a CHINS, an emergency intake process.
Thank you.
But that's pretty rare.
Yeah,
Usually we are able to work around that.
thanks.
Thank you. There are other questions for the chief? Yes, go ahead, Representative Bishop.
Chief, you noted that you would be transporting someone to St. Albans. Are there occasions when Chittenden Correctional is used? And is gender a determining factor as to where someone needs to be transported?
Correct. All of the in-caps, it's my understanding at this point, are going to St. Albans out of Chittenden County. The correctional center in South Burlington doesn't accept them any longer for temporary. It's a temporary custody issue. You know, a number of years ago, you know, it was housed at Chittenden County, even though it was a female specific site. They still took in-caps there, and they've stopped doing that. So it's taken a process for us that used to be an hour or a little more to a really solid couple of hour process, if not more, out of Chittenden County.
Thank you.
Thank you. Go ahead, Representative Cole.
Thank you, Chief. I'm wondering if at the time when the Howard Center was open with the, I think, Act One program, how did that impact your time investment in these types of issues, especially for folks who didn't need medical attention?
It cut it significantly. I mean, they were able to screen. They're much more efficient in the screening process. Their staff were really well versed in what they were looking for and what their job was, and they would refer us to the hospital if they felt there was a need. They also housed, I think, up to 8 at the time in their facility for folks who did not need to be in a secure facility. So there are some people who are taken into protective custody because they need to be, their level of intoxication is to the point where somebody needs to keep an eye on them, but they're cooperative, right? And they agreed to stay there. And, you know, so that also alleviated some of the load for everyone. And it increased, it was much more efficient, so it cut the time significantly.
Thank you.
Other questions for Chief Hall? Yeah.
Maybe one.
Go ahead, Representative Cole.
One follow-up here. One conversation we've been having sporadically in this chat has, like in previous pieces of testimony, we've been talking about access to recovery resources. And I think we don't, you know, automatically assume that when somebody is held in the custody of DOC for like one night, 24 hours, you know, they're getting connected with resources. But, you know, when I think of like the Howard Center, that's kind of like an automatic, like that's part of their nature. Like that's kind of what they do. So, you know, if for the time that we are, you know, doing that overnight in like DOC, if that is the policy that we choose, like, are there ways to improve access to recovery resources in that process?
That might be a question for the Department of Corrections.
Okay.
Well,
Speak to that. I wouldn't be the person to speak to that.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I support that, but I can't.
Yeah. It sounds good. Okay, thank you, Chief. We really appreciate you being here. Hope you feel better and appreciate your comments on this bill.
Okay, thank you very much.
Okay. All right, next we're, we have a bevy of folks from the administration. We're pleased to have you all here this morning. I'm not sure how you have yourselves organized or if this is pre-organized or who's coming first, or are you all going together? What's the scoop?
Yeah.
Okay, so I get we've had quite a bit of testimony from the health department already. So I guess I'm going to say let's hear from corrections first, and then we'll talk about what's being developed in the community between mental health and VDH. Welcome.
Thank you. Again, Al Colm here, Chief of Operations. So to start, I want to clarify that the female facility in Chittenden County does accept the incapacitated population for female. The males all get moved to St. Albans. So we do have some capacity there. The Department of Corrections has been in the business of holding the incapacitated population for as long as I can remember. I've been with the department since '94. We're doing it then, and I think it's safe to assume that we're doing it well before then. So we're well versed in the process and how to handle it. And it's something we deal with on a regular basis. All of our facilities are dealing with it on a regular basis. I think to Representative Donahue's question earlier about what we're seeing, 30 years ago, it was the intoxicated college student or, local individual that everybody was familiar with that would come on the weekend and dry out and go home. We're not sure what they're on now. And that's a big challenge for us. So, they may have some alcohol in their system, they may not, and we'll provide an Alka-Sensor test when they come through the door. They could be highly incapacitated and still triple zeros on the Alka-Sensor. So that puts a little more pressure on us as far as watching, monitoring, providing healthcare services, not knowing what these folks are actually using for substances.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, just a second. Yeah. I just want to make sure you have an opportunity to finish your sentence.
So yeah, I mean, if Representative Donahue has a question.
Okay, go ahead, Representative.
So my understanding of the current statute in terms of protective custody and custody, if it's not incapacitation through intoxication, there isn't authority to do that. So if somebody, blows zero, but is clearly incapacitated by someone else, do you have the authority to hold them?
We do, and we are.
Okay, and is that under the same statute?
Under the same statute, yeah.
Okay.
Because we're considering them incapacitated, not necessarily intoxicated.
Not necessarily inebriated. Okay.
So we'll have Ledge Council review that language with us.
Right.
Yeah.
Yes.
I believe intoxicated's definition is broader in scope than just alcohol, if I'm reading.
In the statute. Okay, I didn't relook at it. Thanks.
If I'm reading from the correct set of definitions.
So can you describe for us, Al, sort of what the process is? So what happens when law enforcement shows up at one of the correctional facilities, and what's the process that the correctional facilities go through when a person is presented to them for safekeeping, if you will?
So we will receive a radio call from law enforcement, letting us know that they're on their way with somebody. They'll bring them into the facility. We'll provide an intake space and start the process of a medical evaluation. Our staff will conduct a pat down to make sure there's no weapons or anything else on them. They're screened by medical. I said the alcohol, the breathalyzer, Alka-Sensor test is provided. We'll try to ask them what they've taken or what they're on. Some will answer, some will not. Some are cooperative, some are not. One of the challenges that we face is that these folks are not technically in our custody as far as a correctional agency, right? We're holding them as a courtesy. So they don't go into our database. We don't have name. We don't have any of that information. So it's hard to track who's in our system. If we do have a name, we will look in our system to see if they may be on supervision. Sometimes they are, sometimes they're not. So we go through that process to try to identify whether or not they're currently in our custody, and we would let the appropriate office know. We're authorized to hold them for no longer than 24 hours. So we only have a 24-hour period with these individuals, and then they're released. So some may still be under the influence, but statutorily we can't hold them for more than 24 hours. Some of the challenges we face with our facility, specifically Northwest, is the location, and trying to get these people back into town so they can.
I was just going to ask, they're transported there by law enforcement. How do they get back to wherever they're going?
Right. So that's often difficult, especially if they're coming out of Chittenden County.
Mm-hmm.
So we'll do our best to get them to the bus stop in St. Albans, and help provide them, hopefully they can get on the bus and get to where they need to be. But the majority of the time, the law enforcement agency that picked them up has their property, has their cell phone, has their identification and all that. So again, it's a challenge for them to get back to where they are. Even St. Johnsbury, where I spent a majority of my career, we're out of town a little bit, and then sometimes they walk, sometimes we can provide transportation, but with the staffing challenges, that's very difficult as well. And then we get a lot of pushback from those towns because the towns don't want these individuals roaming around their bus stops.
Right.
So we're faced with a variety of challenges in this situation.
So you just brought up something that I'm familiar with being on Joint Justice Oversight is the staffing challenges at the correctional facilities. And so I guess I can imagine that this would actually put some stress and strain on staffing challenges in already stretched situation. And I guess I'm interested to know some data about how many people, is one facility used more than another? Do you ever reach a capacity where it's a busy night in Chittenden County and in St. Albans, and you don't have capacity for, a person who is incapacitated? Any of that kind of information that you can share?
I don't have the data on I know there were some numbers presented yesterday, and I think Chittenden County was certainly the highest for utilization. During, I think it was 21, up until 2021, we had taken males and females at Chittenden, and then with the Prison Rape Elimination Act and the pre-federal guidelines, we had to move away from taking the men at Chittenden. So that was the impetus behind that, and understanding that does create a burden on law enforcement to get them up to St. Albans. So I don't have the hard data. I would say that probably Chittenden and St. Albans take the brunt of that. As far
we did see some data about use of DOC, but it didn't really break it down by facility. So I was just
could probably get
curious about if it's St. Albans is the most used, if it's covering Chittenden and Franklin and Grand Isle counties, it probably is. But thank you. That would be helpful.
No, we have data from 2020 where we actually had a college intern that came in because as I stated previously, they're not entered into our system, our offender management system. So it's all paper files. We had a college intern that went through boxes and boxes of files to gather data as we were talking about this and the sunset back in 2020. So we have that, but it's a little dated, but I'm sure it's still accurate in terms of usage.
Well, there was other things going on in 2020 as well.
A few other
things. It would be helpful to some extent to know which facilities are most being used. And another question that we haven't really talked about too much here is, do you see sheriffs being called for any of these kinds of situations? Or is it, in some cases, there are towns that don't have police forces, so it's state police or the sheriffs. In our more populous towns, they have, local police, but I'm just curious about, I know that sort of as a state, in terms of law enforcement, we've moved away from holding cells in, county sheriff's offices or even in municipal offices. Not saying that we should move back to that, because I think, working into other options, but I'm just wondering to what extent you interact with the sheriffs for people who are incapacitated.
Yeah, I think we see that. I think it's spread pretty evenly between sheriffs, state police, and local municipalities, depending on the area.
Yeah.
Johnson State will get college students from Johnson State. Oftentimes it's the sheriffs that are bringing them in. So that's an example, but sometimes it's Morristown, Morrisville, whoever can bring them in. But again, it's going to be dependent on the area of the state, but we do see the sheriffs bring folks in.
Well, we know up in Wolcott that they get pretty rowdy, so. I know you have to look at you. Maybe there's something that we don't know, I'm not sure. Okay, other questions for Mr. Cormier? Yeah, go ahead, Representative Bishop.
Just on the process, is it still paper files that are kept on individuals?
Yes.
And you mentioned that a complicating factor can be that personal belongings remain with the initial law enforcement response. Is there a reason why those, I mean, assuming it's not, a lot of things, if it's, like what I've got on me now.
Right.
Wallet, phone, et cetera.
I think that's really about law enforcement policy to obtain those items before they transport anybody. It's just part of their process to make sure they don't have any weapons. They'll pat them down, remove whatever articles they have on them and keep them there and then transport them.
It would seem difficult for somebody if they don't have their wallet or their phone to be able to,
Absolutely.
find their way back to where they're going. Yeah. That might be something that, we don't have the law enforcement folks on, but, might be something to look at.
I know one question I didn't answer for you.
Yeah.
How many, do we ever have no room at the end?
Yeah.
There's always room at the end, so. So we don't have the luxury of turning those people away.
You don't have
but
people in the general population is what I understood.
No.
Yeah.
They stay in the booking area holding cells. Sometimes it gets tight, but we don't ever turn anybody.
You have to pull people away from other duty stations in order to.
Depending on the situation, if somebody is actively engaging in self-harm behavior, we may have somebody that's watching them, what we call constant observations for the 24 hours that they're there. So those are often difficult situations, but.
Go ahead, Doug.
To a question looping back to Representative Cole earlier, is there any conversation, information, or anything like that that is provided to the individuals when they're
Yes, so there's kind of two tracks. If somebody comes in and we can find somebody that will take them, we can release them before the 24-hour period. If at the 24-hour mark, there isn't anybody and they are released, we'll call the local like recovery center or whatever that will come and meet with them and offer those resources. Again, pre-COVID, when I was superintendent of the facility in St. Johnsbury, we had a good working relationship with the recovery center there where they would actually come pick them up, bring them back to the recovery center, engage with them, offer them services and treatment. But that ended during the COVID years and hasn't been picked back up.
So I guess that's one of the things, going back to what Representative Cole was asking about previously. I think that it's probably unclear, and I know from facility to facility, I know you try as best as you can to make things consistent, but just like any large system, it's not always that way. Wondering, if there's a way to reconnect, the correctional facilities with those community resources. We have lots of recovery centers around the state, and by and large, recovery centers that we've engaged with here are more than willing to go and meet somebody.
Yeah, we've got a great relationship with the recovery center.
Yeah. Oh, I thought I just heard you say that since COVID that hasn't.
Well, I mean, for the release of the incapacitated individuals, but as we have peer recovery coaches coming in on a regular basis, so we have those relationships. But as far as establishing that for the release of the incapacitated individuals, we haven't really engaged with.
It would be really great if you could think about re-engaging with that community resource in particular, because they, timing is everything when we're talking about substances, and oftentimes maybe people might be at that point where engagement might be the thing that they're looking for right then. So
we also know they're struggling with staffing as well. That's often a challenge in getting somebody there.
Yeah, not as much as you.
Yeah.
Is what I'm just gonna say. Yeah. So, okay. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Appreciate it. We didn't actually get your opinion on, and I know we'll all work for the administration. I know this is an administration request, but so just before you get off the hot seat,
We're willing
what are
to.
your thoughts?
We've been doing, as I stated at the beginning, we've been doing this forever. We're prepared to continue to do it. We're better equipped to handle it. So we're pretty agnostic either way on the decision.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Appreciate it.
That's it.
Emily, join us.
Yeah. Al and I are gonna do a little seat switcheroo, I think.
Okay, there you go. And committee members, we do have a presentation.
Yes, we are a department that loves a slideshow.
Yeah.
I think we have a highly skilled slideshow crew over here,
Oh,
so.
hey, Nicole gets bonus points for actually, signing in and getting all ready before, before you sat in the chair. That's, you get extra points in this room.
We'll take it. I'm actually gonna sign in as well so I can see what's happening
Okay.
behind me. So,
By the way, slideshow implies, like your summer vacation or things like that. So
This is not your most recent travels paychecks, I'm not sure.
recent travels were pretty boring. I won't show all those. Maybe afterwards.
Yeah.
It's not letting me in, so I'm just gonna go and Nicole can give me a little, she can throw something at me if I get too far off, so. Just again stating for the record, my name's Emily Haas and I get to be the Commissioner for the Department of Mental Health. Thank you all for having us here today. So we have been working closely with our friends at the Division of Substance Use to think about how to continue building a system of care that is serving our community members regardless of a mental health or substance use system or substance use issue. So that we can take a look at staff efficiencies, but really a more person-centered approach to providing care in our communities. So I'll go to slide 2. It should be a nice description of how we are working to build a crisis system for Vermonters who are experiencing some challenges. So as you'll see, the person is in crisis. We have 988 here in Vermont. It's a national hotline. You can text 988 as well. That call center is divided between 2 designated agencies right now. They offer 24/7 support. Anyone can call 988. It's a co-occurring response. And when I say co-occurring, that's substance use and mental health. As this slide indicates, 95% of the people who call 988, those calls are resolved over the phone. Next, if a call to 988 isn't resolving an issue, there's an opportunity for a mobile crisis team to be dispatched. Mobile crisis is also a co-occurring opportunity for an individual to be served and supported in the community where they are. And then we've also implemented alternative to emergency departments or mental health urgent cares. Those are also a co-occurring opportunity. And then you'll see at the end of this, but certainly not the end of our whole continuum of care, the opportunity for individuals to be served, if appropriate, in a combination PIP and crisis bed situation. So with this, we also value the role of police, emergency or EMS and other first responders in supporting them accessing any number of these resources. Our goal is to move as many interactions with law enforcement away from law enforcement if it's not necessarily indicated or appropriate. We do know that there will be community members that require law enforcement interaction for some, but for the most part, we feel that developing a system that intervenes without law enforcement provides a better outcome. That doesn't mean that there's not a seat at the table for all.
Mm-hmm. Commissioner, I was just, something just popped into my head, having went to a day-long conference last year and I saw the Chittenden County Mobile Crisis vehicle. It was brand new at the time. Then I was just wondering, is that being used in these incapacitated situations?
I don't know. That's a good question.
Because then it just made me think of like, why is everybody going up to St.
Yeah.
Albans?
I'm not sure. So we can certainly talk more with Howard Center on how they're utilizing transport as it relates to their enhanced mobile crisis.
Yeah, I mean, because one of the things I'm thinking about is like, to what extent and how do designated agencies and or DMH and VDH interact with law enforcement to make sure that they're aware of what the resources are in the community and how to access them, and what this nice little chart shows, you know, to what extent have y'all been presenting this kind of information to the, you know, chiefs of police, to the state police, the sheriff's association?
Yes. All of those associations and organizations are well aware that this is the movement that AHS, DMH, DSU is working towards. We meet weekly with our public safety friends. And we just hosted DMH just hosted a conference yesterday down in Killington where we did have some chief of police presence who are buying into the mission of DMH and AHS to make sure that folks are getting to the right services that they need when and where they need them.
Struck me that the chief in Colchester didn't mention anything about a mobile crisis in Chittenden County.
Yes. We have still work to do from I think a culture perspective of serving folks in the community where they are. And I think there is also some challenges in areas of the state that have resources that look similar, but have different funding lines. But the staff all have very similar skills and training. And so that's something that we see as a huge benefit from the PIP mental health crisis bed merger, is that you have a set of staff that can and should be trained in co-occurring disorder treatment. And then we have opportunities to serve them. And if they need a longer stay, past that 24 hours, and then we have an opportunity maybe to engage them in participating in other types of treatment and referring and services. But with Enhanced Mobile Crisis, that's about a year old this past January. And, you know, I think around our numbers are around 85% of those are resolved in the community, and we want to continue to grow that. And it is a shift for our system to think about responding in a way that's in the community all the time, because Enhanced Mobile Crisis isn't at a hospital. It's not at an emergency department. So being where that person is, and then providing an opportunity to serve that person from a co-occurring lens, not just screening for hospitalization. Whether that be on an involuntary or voluntary basis, but also trying to determine where they are in their intoxication or their symptoms of mental illness, and what kind of services do they want to participate in or not.
And so I haven't looked ahead because I'm trying to pay attention. So to what extent do you feel like this build out and this vision has been built out, and what parts of the state do you see? So we heard about Front Porch up in the Northeast Kingdom, which sound like a great opportunity. Sound like it's working pretty well, but look in St. Johnsbury and things not as working as well as they are in Newport.
Yes.
And other parts of the state. Just interested, if you're going to go through that, then I'll hold that question. But yeah, go ahead, Representative Bishop.
A couple of questions related to the slide that's currently up. Those seem like good success rates, if you will, 95% who are on the phone. It's resolved, 81% in the community. Do we have a sense as how many people are utilizing those?
Yeah.
100 people who are in crisis, if 95% the first call by someone is to the police,
Yeah.
it's yeah.
Yeah, that's a really great question. We do have the ability to collect a good amount of data for the 988 lines. So I'll say that we've had around 30,000 individuals contact 988. And so we've also seen
first year.
it, and we know that's since 9/8 has been operating. So I think are we 2 years old, 3 years old at this point? Time has been a vortex for me since COVID, so I apologize. It all is the same. So I think we're about maybe 3 years into 988 here in Vermont. We have seen a 55% increase in since the beginning of January for calls to the 988 line, which is certainly in line with what we're seeing our communities experiencing as far as increased stress and instability.
And then questions related to the enhanced mobile crisis teams. When they are out, would police presence usually also be there, but maybe step into the background? Or do they sometimes never involved in that response? Or do they stay there until enhanced mobile crisis? What's the interaction there?
Yeah, that's a great question. I would say it could be all of those things. Law enforcement could be there and then step out once the determination is that they don't need to be there. There are some billing rules around enhanced mobile crisis, but that's really for the mobile crisis team to figure out. The issue is serving the individual where they are. And so it could also be that a family member has called 988 or has the individual sitting with them. Or working on a protocol between 988 and 911. So there is a skill set that's developed there that if somebody calls 911, but it really could be better served by a 988, they can transfer that call over to 988 and then enhanced mobile crisis can get dispatched from there. Sometimes law enforcement might be involved, sometimes not.
And last question, I'm sorry, I don't know with great detail the enhanced mobile crisis approach routine, but it sounds like it's been in place for about a year. If I understood correctly, you referred to some level of resistance or adaptation of law enforcement or others in the community.
Yes.
What was the shift from, and do you have any thoughts on what the rub is, if you will, on?
I think that anytime we have to get information in order to bill a service, there's a rub there. You know, folks may not feel comfortable giving information. I think Kelsey talked about it's much easier when things are grant funded. Unfortunately, grants are not necessarily stable for year after year after year. And so needing to exploit as much billing opportunity, there is an FMAP, enhanced FMAP dollar when you're billing enhanced mobile crisis. And so I think behind the scenes, it's the complications of just having somebody sit there, but also needing some information to bill. So
it is a more difficult situation when we have things that we need as a capacity for a community, so, I think about crisis beds as being one of those. I mean, those are things you need as a capacity and, all over the state. And yet you still have to some extent, have a fee for service kind of knowledge, the ability to tap, who is the person in this bed at this time? Are they Medicaid eligible? Are they not? All of that kind of stuff.
And that does put, a burden on communities. It puts burden on the staff who are trying to figure out how to navigate those different payment systems, so to speak. Most communities just want to have a trained individual respond to somebody who's experiencing something, and they don't want to have to think about that. But that's our role, is to have all that solved so that they don't have to
think about it. Yeah, we have Representative Donahue and then Representative Cole.
The grant funding you referenced for components, is that time-limited pilot funding as opposed to, so we know that it's going to come to an end?
Yeah.
When is that? And is that both the 988 and the mobile crisis?
No, I don't want to confuse those things. So I'll take, for example, historically, we've been able to use some, say, investment dollars to serve, to fund positions within law enforcement. That is something that, as our federal guidelines shift, that's not something that Medicaid dollars can be used for. And so we need to go out and find grant dollars or ask towns to pay for that service if they want that service. That's the situation. I think that's happened in Chittenden County for sure. But that's a different than 988 grants and enhanced mobile crisis.
Right. But specific to 988 and enhanced mobile crisis.
Enhanced mobile crisis is through the enhanced FMAP rate. So that's not a grant.
Okay, so that's not a time limited
Correct.
point. Okay.
Yes, and 988 is also a mixture of grant and a cascade from last year's legislative session around dollars. That is a grant. We currently have grant dollars to spend on that. And I don't think that's part of our mental health block grant, but what is that $988 out of?
No, it's from SAMHSA, but I do want to look back real quick because the enhanced mobile crisis, the enhanced FMAP for that is time limited.
Oh, 12
Yeah,
quarters,
yeah,
right.
so yes.
When does it?
Right, this is,
27?
it's called,
Yeah.
when you speak from the side, just,
Oh, I'm so
that's
sorry.
okay,
Yeah.
please state your name.
Yeah, so just for the record, Nicole Cesar, the Director of Policy for the Department of Mental Health.
Yeah, I think it's 12 quarters from the beginning. And it's March
I think it's
27.
I think it's 27.
I think that's true. Sorry, I forget about that piece. That's an important piece not to forget about.
So,
Yes, particularly since it's been pretty successful.
Yes, yeah.
Yeah.
So just two others that are sort of just statistical. So the mobile crisis is now 24/7 in every part of the state.
There's opportunities for 24/7, every part of the state. We have set into action opportunities for, it's a 2-person response.
Yeah.
One of those can be a telehealth response. There's also opportunities for designated agency staff to not stay in their region. They can cross regions. And so that's been a shift as well. There's some flexibility in that.
Yeah, I'm not sure the word
Opportunity. Yeah,
is
that's definitely-
it functioning
Yeah.
feet on the ground in
Should
every
be.
part of the county?
Yes, it is available and operating statewide.
And,
Of course.
and the last piece, what percentage of the 988 calls are now answered in Vermont? I know that initially it was only a certain percentage.
Yeah, I think it's very high now. I don't have that exact data point. I want to say it's over 80s, 87%. I'm looking at
Yeah.
Nicole, but
I know,
that might have
The rest
shifted.
is still.
Yeah, but that might have shifted recently with an open position at one of the call centers. So we can get back with the accurate data instead of me just.
Representative Cole and then Representative Bishop.
Yeah, this funding conversation is very important and I think something to definitely keep talking about, so we can continue this awesome service. My question, Representative Bishop kind of hit on it already, but it seems based on what we're hearing, the experience someone has when they call 988 or someone else calls 988 for them versus calls 911 is pretty different. Just the way it is. And on that slide that we were just on, you spoke to this a little bit already, but I see the up arrows from the police, EMS, first responders piece. So that to me, when I first saw that, I was like, oh, okay. So when somebody calls 911, then they might have the ability to transfer to 988 because those on the top row are 988 services. So
We are working on that. Yeah.
exactly. So I thought, that was great to hear. And I think, if there are any ways that we can support in making that process like more, like a smooth transition until folks get the natural inclination, like, oh, 988, that's the right, because it's so new. So
Yes,
people
yeah,
are
yeah.
not automatically calling that. So I think
Yes.
whatever we can do to support.
And I'm happy to have our 988 and crisis program director come and answer some of those questions for you. But you hopefully are starting to see things like this 988 sticker and getting on the bus and seeing bus advertisements so that folks know that 988 is an option. And there's still a lot of work to do with that. But I know that we're here to talk about PIP and crisis beds.
Yeah.
And so I do want to make sure that I'm honoring those.
I do, and I know that we have to do that, but I just want to check in with Representative Bishop to see if you still have a question.
I do. It's still along the funding line. So if you prefer we move on, we can.
Yeah, if we could, that would be good. I want to make sure that VDH gets an opportunity to talk about their role in how this is integrated. And then I see you do address sort of the build out here that I was asking about earlier. So it looks like it's an opportunity for Kelly or Tony or whomever is going to speak from VDH. I see you're highlighted on this slide, so.
Yes, I can certainly speak to this. So like Commissioner Hawes said, the Department of Health and the Department of Mental Health have been working closely on sort of this idea of merging the PIP program with the mental health crisis bed program. It's an opportunity to find efficiencies in staffing and to better meet community needs. Given the workforce challenges that that there is in human services and substance use agencies. So we've started conversations, and you'll see throughout the slide deck sort of the timeline and where we are, but we started the conversations with Northeast Kingdom Human Services. So the idea is that this combined approach will better serve Vermonters who are in crisis, whether that's due to intoxication or a mental health crisis.
Thank you. One of the questions that I had, so I'm understanding that the grant agreements with designated agencies this year are being modified to sort of include this concept as a requirement, exactly, not only as a option, but as a requirement. And I'm just wondering about places where, for instance, like in Chittenden County and Lamoille County, I didn't realize in Southeast, but I saw that yesterday, where they had dropped their programs. Will they have that funding reinstated in order to shore up their emergency services to be able to deal with the, I guess what I would call added responsibilities of the folks who are incapacitated?
Yes, I think we're working on that. You'll see in the slide deck the sort of the progression. Like I said, we're going to start with Northeast Kingdom, but then actually go back one, Nicole. So we're going to implement in phases, and so utilizing the designated agencies, as well as we do have 5 beds in Rutland County that are not managed by the designated agency. They're managed by Recovery House. So yes, and I'll let Emily speak to or add to anything that I've said.
Okay, yes, we actually heard about the 5 beds there, and I think that we're not immune to understanding the fact that it doesn't make fiscal sense or staffing sense to have something as 24/7 that really is a low incidence use. And we've seen the numbers where that drops, but we still need the capacity. And so how do we have the capacity pair with other things that maybe already exist? So like a residential service in the case of the Rutland Addison situation, or crisis services that deal with situations where folks already have dual issues coming in. So I appreciate the fact that you're recognizing that we still need the capacity and trying to figure out a way to provide that capacity within a system that can be more efficient and actually build on the skills that exist in those emergency and residential services. So anyways, I think I understand what you're doing. I think it's good. And it's trying to figure out the timing of whether, you know, we wait 2 years until you have built this out. We don't know what the environment is federally. We don't know if you're going to be able to figure out how to fund 988 on an ongoing basis. Same with mobile crisis. You know, those two things are relatively new. So there's still a lot of questions, I guess I would say, before we kind of jump to, healing statute. I'm wondering, I'm wondering about, when I'm connecting that,
Yes.
you know, we can see a lot of work being done.
Yeah.
And so in my mind, I'm just wondering if it's a tad early to be thinking about repealing the statute. So I'm just putting that out there as a question. Representative Donahue.
Yeah, this actually segues well from that, because I don't think this program would ever lead to repealing statute, right? Because this is simply replacing the existing lack of PIP beds and merging them. But this remains only for people who are voluntary, and only for people who can be safely contained, if you will.
So there may be people.
There would still be the same people. Now, there might be a slight shift because a mobile team might be more able to persuade someone to voluntarily go. But barring that, the same group of people is still going to end up in corrections, because the original statute envisioned something that it called secure non-DOC capacity for, detox. And that's not part of what's being built here.
That's right.
So there remains the identical secure, which would still be DOC.
Hopefully
which
reduce it somewhat.
maybe reduce it somewhat, but it would still say you have to repeal the transition
I
to
understand
no
what you're
DOC.
saying. Yeah,
So
yeah, I understand what
it
you're
doesn't
saying.
solve our underlying concern around DOC for a public health problem.
That's right. Yeah, I think to me, I feel like it supports, hopefully reduced use of DOC.
And an improved system
And an
for
improved-
those who don't
For
fit
sure,
in that category.
for sure. Yeah, yeah.
And I think that's why I started my testimony today, just highlighting, we'll have a even in a perfect world, you'll still have a subset of folks who need a more secure environment and that's, I think, is the repeal request at that opportunity.
I'm definitely understanding.
Our goal is to not use DOC when we don't need to.
Yeah, yeah. So even if all of this was working at 150% of their, capacity and effectiveness, there's still going to be most likely some people who
and therefore a need for
unwilling to
repeal, right?
Yeah.
Need for repeal, unless a secure system was set up separate from DOC.
Yeah. Okay.
I will say that all of these system shifts and build out system is also directly related to our community-based integrated health center project that DMH is doing in certifying all of those designated agencies. So mobile crisis has to be a part of that.
Which is also a pilot that ends in a couple of years in terms of funding, right?
We have a lot of stuff ending in around 2027. I also think
nervousness about all of this.
I mean, I think we're all living with that anxiety and nervousness. A lot of these things have a healthy amount of bipartisan support, both federally, nationally. And so that does give some hope. I keep hope. We have to do that. But I do think that this, with the CCBHC work, even though that is grant funded, and has also a timeline for enhanced rate, I anticipate that we'll see enough positives that's going to show that endeavor has been worth it.
But it's about extending additional funding. It's not even about the issue of cuts in.
Right.
Yeah.
Which makes it higher risk.
Totally.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, I have to say, the best laid plans right now, we don't know where they're going to go. Fact is, I think that we appreciate that you have a plan. I can just say that because I can say we deal with some departments who, despite being asked for plans, they don't produce them. So I appreciate the fact that you have a plan but I do understand it is contingent upon, where the funding shakes out and
every state is in this situation
Exactly.
for us. And I wish I had that recorded because I would tell my dad, who never thinks I have a plan, and I'm But guess what? I've got a plan.
You can probably get her.
Yeah.
All right, so let's just kind of move through the slides. I see, you have a Gantt chart here that describes, the different phases of build out. I love the content of monitoring and evaluation, that feedback loop back about, is this working?
Yes.
Hopefully it includes the experiences of participants, consumers in that process. When you say funding identified, what does that mean? Is expansion of this included in the governor's budget for FY26? Are you redirecting resources within your existing budgets? Are you, calling upon things that you already have and, trying to, shore up this service? What's the scoop on that?
So currently from a mental health crisis bed, those are funded in a case rate situation. And so, and then with the PIP beds, and that's currently grant funded. And so what we'll need to do is either braid those as is or pull out and determine the rate and supplement that back into the crisis bed system.
Go
ahead. Yeah, no, go ahead, Kelly.
I was just going to say we did not need to request any funding in the FY26 budget. So once we figure out sort of the rate going forward, we'll see what the impact is, but we did not request any funding for FY26.
Okay. Meaning that you were able to do it within existing funding, that your phase one. Okay. And I'm just curious about the decision, particularly with the Howard Center being, probably the biggest chunk of Chittenden County being the biggest chunk of people who impact this system or, part of the system, why that's pushed off. And Lamoille County, even though a smaller county, those are two of the more recent counties that discontinued their services, and why they are pushed off into 27.
Readiness, I would say, when DMH and VDH met to talk about comparing which crisis beds were ready and which PIP beds were ready to make that adjustment. When looking across the whole system, readiness was that primary decision maker. And I would say Chittenden County does present with different complexities than some of the other parts of the state. And so we want to do that right.
I'm trying to figure out who's missing here. Maybe there's anybody. Grand Isle will come under the Howard Center one. So I don't see NCSS here. So would it be?
They have a crisis bed.
Yeah, NCSS has a crisis bed.
I just don't see them on your implementation schedule.
That's right, because they don't currently have a PIP bed. They don't have PIP dollars.
So these are only that seems to be the only one missing. If the Rutland County one does, they told us they did Rutland and Addison. I don't know if that's accurate, but that's we got HCRS, we got Washington County, UCS. Northeast Kingdom. I think NCSS is the only one that's missing.
The other reason why NCSS is probably missing is because they're not a preferred provider for the adult substance use system. And so they don't receive dollars from the Division of Substance Use. So that's why you're not seeing NCSS on there, because they're not a preferred provider.
Okay.
So part of this is blending a designated agency system that is both served by the Department of Mental Health and then served separately.
I get
the
that.
Division of Substance Use.
Yeah, and we know that some of the designated agencies, I thought it was more than just NCSS, but are
Lamoille County is also not a preferred provider. And I'm looking at over.
Yeah.
That's right, correct?
NCSS actually is a preferred provider for substance use services in Franklin County.
For the younger kids.
Okay, thank you.
For children, right, Kelly?
Adolescent services.
Adolescents, yeah.
Adolescents, you're right. Yeah, sorry about that.
So I guess, thinking from a statewide system perspective, it really shouldn't matter if they're a preferred provider. What we should be looking at is the capacity for all 14 of our counties. And this is close. It's not quite there. So I'm just going to challenge, the health department and mental health to be looking at statewide capacity. And it obviously could look different depending upon where you are and the number of people that you might interact with who are in this situation. But I would think that the presence of being a preferred provider shouldn't be for substance use services shouldn't be necessarily a determining factor. I mean, we would want to see these supports available statewide in some capacity, and whether the Howard Center is agreeing to do that for Franklin, Grand Isle, and Chittenden County, I don't know. But other than that, so. Okay, thank you. Just take that for what it's worth. All right, and then we saw the build out, and then thank you. You got people responsible.
We do.
Which is great. And we did hear from the Northeast Kingdom. I mean, so we actually heard I guess what I would say was a nice progress report on what they're doing up there. They seem pretty psyched about it, and I love the fact that you're keeping data. Right at the beginning of this. And I think, from an agency perspective, I don't know if Brendan is listening to this someplace, but, I think that we need to integrate the DOC data somehow in this to understand what's the impact of those individuals, not just merely, how many in total, but, how are those facilities being impacted by their use as, for folks who are incapacitated, and the ability to connect folks with the supportive services. So I was a little discouraged to hear that they aren't really doing that right now. Okay. Do you have any final things, Kelly, Tony?
No, I think
Emily, Nicole? Anybody else who's here from those two departments?
I don't have anything else from the health department unless there are questions.
Chair Wood, the one thing I did want to mention was under the FY27 build out, it does say that the Howard Center would be the St. Albans or Franklin Grand Isle region build out, that they would be accepting the contract rather than NCSS.
Yes, I mean, I noted that up there on the phase 2. I just didn't know if that was on purpose or that had been negotiated already, or so I appreciate the fact that you are looking at the whole state. I just seen, okay, that's good. Thank you, Tony. Yeah. Okay. So I'm going to ask you the same thing I asked as the final question from corrections. So what is your preference or stance on the language as submitted to repeal that section of statute that would no longer make DOC an option?
I think from DMH's perspective and our work with the agency and across the agency, we know that despite all this work, there will continue to likely be individuals who need a secure setting. And so I would support repealing so that that's an opportunity. Although we're working diligently to make sure it's not an opportunity, or that opportunity, I guess it's not really an opportunity. So I'll stop saying that. Now that I can't stop, that resource decreases in utilization as we build out our other components of the system. But I don't think that will resolve the issue that there will be community members who.
Necessary tool, but not an opportunity.
Yeah, and I'll be frank, we don't really have the resources to build out the what would be a community secure public health
Right.
approach at this point in time. I mean, that's, we do have to deal with reality at the same
Yes,
time.
absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Kelly.
Yeah, I would agree with Commissioner Hawes. There really is no alternative that exists. So, and there will always be a need. However, we hope that the need will decrease. But, you know, there's, like I said, there's no other resource that we could use in place of DOC.
And I would say at this point in time, I think that we definitely appreciate the continued development and working with Designated and other providers to build out a community response for individuals who are in this situation. And if you were coming and saying that we need additional resources to invest in corrections to do what they're doing now, we would be having a different conversation. We'd be saying those resources should be used in the community to build out, a better approach. But what we're trying to do here is to utilize the resources that we have. And I appreciate your attention this morning and appreciate the information you've provided. And thank you all for being here. And Kelly, we save you a seat at the table if you were here. You've been here so often lately. So
I know. I unfortunately, I think in the same boat as Chief Paul.
Well, I hope you feel better.
Thank you.
And thank you for being here several times in the last couple of weeks. Okay, folks, we have our next witness has arrived. Jennifer Stratton is here. And she is from Loyal County Mental Health, representing a program that closed down. And welcome, Jennifer.
Thank you so much. Good morning, everybody.
Morning.
Thank you.
So we've just been hearing for the last hour and a half or so about the use of correctional facilities from public safety, the police chief in Colchester, and then VDH and mental health around sort of the build out of what they hope is going to be a more comprehensive system for people who utilize substances with the emergency system, people who are incapacitated to be sort of left alone or and whether or not, the whole question here is whether or not we repeal or not the section of the statute that would make the Department of Corrections no longer an option as of July 1. And so welcome. Glad to have you. And
thank you for inviting me.
Yes, we're interested in hearing about Lamoille County's experience and the decisions that led up to your agency's decision to no longer provide this service, and what you see from a provider perspective looking forward. You're in the phase 2 of the build out and what you see going forward. So welcome.
Great. Thank you again so much for taking the time to invite me. So we did close our program, and when we opened our program, it was a great partnership with our local law enforcement. We work with the Morristown Police Department and Hyde Park Sheriff's Department, and I know both Jason, Chief Luno, and Roger Moku had hoped to be here today, but they had another meeting. But I would hope that maybe they would have an opportunity to speak as well. But it was a partnership when we opened our PIP bed through the Vermont Department of Health, and it was really to try to decriminalize and keep people out of corrections. And I would say from my perspective, I wasn't the CEO at the time, but I was at Lamoille. It was a very successful program. And it was not a program that we wanted to close. There were 3 years in a row that we took a significant loss. And we had been communicating with the Department of Health, trying to get additional funding, but was unsuccessful to do so. For fiscal year 21, 22, and 23, we lost over $100,000 in those 3 years. And initially, when we received the funding, it was at a higher rate. It was $230,000. And then the Vermont Department of Health cut that down significantly to just over $100,000. And we actually had communicated with our local legislators and were successful in getting some of that funding back, but not all of that funding. And we just got to a place financially as an organization that we could not continue. We had no other revenue to offset that. So it was a very difficult decision for our organization and for our community. I've spoken with our local law enforcement, and it is something that they miss as well. And I will say that I was looking prior to coming here this morning at just some of the data. And in fiscal year 23, we had, when we closed our ASAP program, we had less than 20% of our community members who were going to the correctional facility. And now with the closing of the ASAP bed, I don't know exactly what those numbers look like. Again, I would encourage you to have our local law enforcement here to speak to that, but I know it has been very difficult now when they are having to have a PIP assessment done. They are having to transport individuals out of our community. And actually, when this was something, when we closed our bed, we continued to provide those PIP assessments for our local law enforcement. But when I stepped into my role at LCMHS, we had been looking at a lot of different financial information, and I realized that we were not receiving payment for providing those PIP screenings because we are not the preferred provider. Our local FQHC is in our catchment area. And so we don't have the ability to bill Medicaid for that service. Well, I guess we can bill it, but we don't have the ability.
We'll get paid for it.
What's happening?
Yeah.
And so I spoke with Chief Luno and Sheriff Marcoux about this. And I will say, have made several attempts to try to get in touch with the Department of Health to try to see if we could get some funding back to be able to provide that support to our community. It is very much needed. And currently right now, law enforcement are having to transport people an hour outside of our catchment area for that assessment. And I know individuals are going to corrections. I don't know the
Copley for an assessment?
No, I don't know exactly where law enforcement is transporting them, but yesterday when I spoke with Sheriff Marcoux, he said they're having to transport an hour outside of our catchment area.
Just for the assessment, not for the whole.
Yeah. I do know that the other piece with this, Representative Wood, as you're just mentioning, before somebody goes to correctional, they have to go to the emergency room to be medically cleared, to be able to go to the correctional facility for holding. And so from my perspective, that's a lot more cost than what it was to run our bed.
Well, since the emergency room is the most costly part of the hospital, yeah. Can I ask, what do you have for emergency services? So, the whole concept that we've been hearing about is integrating PIP services with, it doesn't have to be emergency services, I guess, per se, because the substance use provider, it's combined with their, in Rutland, Addison County, it's combined with their residential services that they offer in terms of treatment. And so do you have another, I guess what I would call 24/7 service, whether it's emergency services or whether it's a residential service that you can look to maybe enhance with some funding from BDH to be able to reestablish this? I mean, I know they have you as doing that in FY27, but there's a kind of it's a big chunk of the state really that doesn't, it's more rural. And so I can imagine if we had Sheriff Marcoux here, he would be talking about what you just said, because there's no, the correctional facility is not located close by, and the FQHC is not 24/7.
No, it's not. And one additional thing before, and I'll answer your question, but talking about the FQHC, the other thing that I have done, since I haven't heard back from the Department of Health about trying to obtain some of those grant dollars just to do the assessment piece, since they are the preferred provider, I recently have had conversations with Susan Bartlett, who's the interim executive director at our local FQHC. And she is very open to exploring the possibility of contracting with us. And she is trying to arrange a meeting with Vermont Department of Health to see if we can all sit down together. So either they can contract with us, or to, again, see if the dollars can flow. So I feel like she's been partnering with us to try to help meet this need in our community. But in regards to crisis service, we do have a mobile crisis team that is 24/7, 365 days a year. And in addition to that, we have what we call our Oasis House, which is a crisis bed. And the need for that bed is great. It is always full. And we have been talking about trying to see if we can expand to 3 beds. It's currently 2 beds, but there's some additional steps that we would have to take with that. But I think if we were going to look at maybe using like the Oasis bed to take individuals that maybe we would have taken at our ASAP bed, we would definitely have to take some additional steps. I think, one thing that comes to my mind about that is the PIP bed the stay was 24 hours or less. When we're talking about individuals coming into the crisis bed, they're staying for several days. So we would have to make sure that individuals had some sort of, medical clearance. I'm thinking about the medical safety of detoxing, and we're looking to incorporate that. I do believe that one designated agency has already such a program that they have incorporated, and that's Washington County Mental Health Services. And I believe they have worked closely with their local hospital to develop that. And I think it's something they've been able to do it that absolutely could be explored. And again, we didn't want to close our bed. It was something that had, from our perspective, very high success rates and met a need in our community. So we are very open to doing whatever we can to meet that need in our community again. If it was something that we were going to be looking at incorporating into an existing resource, I think it would be essential that we would make sure not only that we have safety supports in place, but that also we have adequate funding to do so. Because our ASAP bed, one of the problems with it too, with the funding, was the staffing. We did not have adequate funding to staff it. And we had a full-time staff member, and then the model that we went with was many individuals who were part-time on call that we would call in. And I have heard information that people have had concern that there wasn't high enough utilization of the PIP beds. But when I was going back last night and looking at our data, it was during COVID too. So many things changed during COVID around utilization. So I wanted to throw that out there because I think it did definitely affect numbers as well.
Sure. And I think that it's difficult anywhere in terms of staffing. And so, I can see where if you kind of are running a standalone program as a 24/7 program and another standalone program as a 24/7 program, that it would be difficult to maintain that level of staffing, particularly these days.
Yes.
But I think that there could be some efficiencies achieved by thinking about how do we integrate these services with additional training and, so where you might need to have two people, if you were operating it separately, you might only need one to supplement what's happening over here. So Representative Cole.
Yeah, hi, thank you so much. Continuing on that funding piece in question, that preferred provider status is preventing you, or not having that is preventing you from acquiring Medicaid reimbursement, is my understanding, correct?
Yes, that is correct for conducting those assessments.
The assessments, yeah. And I feel like, in addition to having to ask, BDH for funding every year, which is a big ask and kind of burdensome, I guess, and being able to expect that revenue, like that Medicaid piece seems so critical to keeping you above water. And so I'm wondering, for example, we have a bill on our wall, Medicaid coverage for play therapy. Like maybe I'm not the expertise on how we can include other things in being eligible for Medicaid coverage, but I'm just wondering on the legislative level, is there anything that we can do to put you in that status or to help you overcome that so you can get at least that intake piece covered?
This is an administrative problem. It's not a Medicaid coverage problem. So Medicaid covers the service.
Yeah.
It is being designated as a preferred provider that's preventing the agency from billing. So that's something that really is in the total control right now of the Department of Health. And, that seems like an administrative barrier that could be overcome because I understand the whole concept. I mean, it really is kind of formed around the designated agency concept and needing to have a buck stops here kind of entity in each locale. There's different, we can get VDH back here at some point in time to talk about why they do that. But, in this case, the FQHC is not 24/7. This is a service that's needed often in after hours. It doesn't make sense.
Yes.
What they're doing does not make sense.
Yeah, I think I couldn't agree more, Representative Wood, that is really a key component. I mean, our FQHC, we partner with them. We have a good working relationship, but they are not 24/7. And
frankly, they're struggling right now to even stay afloat.
Yes.
So, thinking about these partnerships is actually really very, very important for them and for the community right now, because I suspect that they're not making money on this either. So thinking about how to overcome those barriers. So if there's ways that we can be helpful in that, and understanding, why certain things are existing, I'm sure that, too bad Kelly signed off, but I'm sure that we can ask them, and if you, it just doesn't make sense, in this particular situation, there should be some administrative way around that. And if there's a will, there's a way. We just have to make sure there's a will, besides here.
yeah, I think that's well said. And hopefully, like I said, Susan, the executive director of our local FQHC, is trying to orchestrate a meeting with the Vermont Department of Health. So I'm hopeful that maybe some of those barriers, there could be some changes in them. But yes, you spoke to them well. That is exactly, the challenge. And as local law enforcement says, these things don't happen, typically 8 to 4:30. It is in weekends.
Yeah,
absolutely. And so I think, back to your point around the bed that we currently have, I think that, we do have a responsibility to be as fiscally responsible and as efficient as we can. But I think absolutely making sure the training, I see some additional components that would have to be incorporated into our existing crisis spend if we're going to move that way.
Sure.
And again, I think, it has been done. Washington County has done it. And I believe
Northeast Kingdom has done it too.
Okay. So it can be done. It's, and I think it's just really detailing out those pieces and making sure that there's adequate training and funding to cover the different components.
just, we asked this question of the department, DMH and VDH. But we noticed that their sort of build out, they have Howard Center and Lamoille in 27. And when I asked, because those are the two most recent places that closed their PIP beds, why they weren't in the 26 work plan, they said it was because of readiness. Yeah.
So be the most ready.
You know, it seems to me. So I would just encourage you, you know, to have those conversations and, you know, I'm just letting you know that that's what was portrayed. And that may be true of the Howard Center. The volume there is much bigger. Than the volume we're talking about in Lamoille County.
Yeah.
But in any event, I think it's one of those things, you know, particularly in our more rural parts of the state that we want to make sure that those rural parts of the state get coverage as well.
Yes, and last legislative session, Senator Westman and I had spoken, and I know that there was, I don't know if it was actually a legislative committee, but there was language that was drafted that required the Vermont Department of Health to have some meetings over the summer to look at the PIP beds and what worked and what didn't work. Yes. And my understanding was they did hold those meetings through the summer, but Lamoille County Mental Health Services was not invited to that meeting, had no idea that that was happening. And I don't believe that any of the other designated agencies such as Northeast Kingdom, Howard Center, I don't believe that they were invited or aware of that meeting either to participate, because we absolutely would have participated in that meeting and shared our experience.
Sure. Well, I think that sometimes you just need to sometimes when you might need to take the initiative with them. I know that they have a very sort of like at VDH, a very sort of, you know, preferred provider. We hear that a lot. And if you're not on that list, you're, even though some of those other agencies you talked about are on that list. You know, I think that's something for Vermont Care Partners to be, you know, I guess looking at universally for the designated and specialized service agencies. And we may need to sort of, you know, challenge this concept of preferred provider and understanding more about, I'm sure it has a historical perspective about why it was necessary. And then we need to think about, is that continuing to serve the purpose for which it was intended? And so that's going to be a question for another day, but just want to make sure you have anything else that you want to add to your testimony, Jennifer?
No, I think I've covered the pieces, and I guess the only other thing in regards to the staffing pieces, I mentioned that, but it really, you know, I professionally grew up in the developmental service system, and person-centered is extremely important to me. And we were able to bring choice to the clients who were staying in the PIP bed. They could bring in peer recovery. They could choose to go inpatient or receive services out in the community. And I think that that is a beautiful thing for so many different reasons. And it really, we had a high rate of individuals who entered the bed that were connected then after to other services, whether that be peer recovery or case management or therapy through our organization or somewhere else.
Yeah, exactly what we'd want to see happening, you know, so appreciate that perspective. Any other questions for Jennifer? Thank you so much for being here. Appreciate your perspectives, Jennifer.
Thank you so much for taking the time to have me.
Of course. So we had invited Valley Vista, and I don't have anything here in terms of whether they accepted or not. And we don't have anybody in the waiting room, right? Okay, so I'm going to presume that they did not accept the invitation because I don't have a name on the agenda. We had invited them.
Agenda on the
doesn't have it?
does not.
Oh, okay. All right. So good.
Yeah.
All right. Okay, folks, then you have an opportunity for a break, which we haven't had yet this morning. We have, we're at 11 o'clock, we're going to take up H58, an act relating to Medicaid coverage for play therapy, which we have not officially taken that bill off the wall. I want people to know, but this is just trying to understand if there really is an issue or whether it's an issue of training or not. So